Morning, guys. Good morning, afternoon, evening, depending upon where you are. Everyone hear me okay? Sound good? Signal good? Hi, Emma. Hi, Emma. No problem about the Facebook posts. Toying with the courses, which to do as the price is not to be missed. Um, yeah, we've had so many questions about the herbal courses. And I think what dictates which course you do is what you want to achieve. In that, if you're wanting to immerse yourself in the wonderful world of herbal medicine, making remedies, learning herbal profiles, learning how to treat home ailments, the home herbalist, village herbalist model with no intention of practicing professionally, then there's no real question that the master home herbalist is the course. That's the one, um, that was, we spent a lot of time designing and creating that course to act as a one-stop shop for empowering village and home herbalism. It literally gives you everything you need to pick up that role and run with it. Whereas if you're thinking that maybe you want to get a professionally recognized accredited qualification that will allow you to apply for insurance to practice and work, in a professional context, start a business, whatever it may be, then the online diploma, the accredited diploma in herbal medicine is the one that would be, that's what that course is designed for. So the village herbalist, clinical herbalist split is the way that we design the courses. So hopefully that makes sense. Okay, but like I say, they are obviously on a massive discount until next Thursday. So any questions, do let me know. Right. So today, moving on to, I was actually toying with, I was almost going to do a 12th hour change of content today, because yesterday I spoke about the Himalayan system of herbalism, and I briefly said about lots of the work that I do and lots of the remedies I use and the herbal frameworks I use come from the Himalayan traditions of herbalism, because to my mind they're the most phenomenal. They're Ayurvedically inspired, but they're unique in many ways, and it's the system of herbalism that I love the most. Those of you who've joined either the master home herbalist or the online diploma, um, you obviously get access to a free 4-part course called Herbal Health and Vitality in Middle Age and Beyond. And that's exclusively looking at how we optimize health using these Himalayan traditions. And I was going to talk about one of the most famous herbs in Himalayan medicine, the famous goji berry, and looking at why it's so important around longevity and disease prevention, and how to use it as a medicinal herb in things of, like goji berry syrups and teas and things like that. But maybe we hold that off for a bonus session. Perhaps if that's something you would like to learn about, then do let me know and we can try and slot that in somehow. But today I want to talk about herbal infusions. But just to recap on yesterday, we spoke about herbal tinctures. We spoke about why they're such a brilliant prescribing modality to know about for the home herbalist and the clinical herbalist, in terms of the benefits they afford. We looked at the concept of a cross prescription alchemy. That if you use one prescription, you get a really good gain. But if you combine that with another prescription and a third prescription, all targeted to the same endpoint, you get an exponential alchemical synergistic response. We looked at our next remedy, which was the first ointment that we explored. And obviously, we spoke about how to take your journey further in terms of the village herbalist role and the master home herbalist course. And we spoke about the accredited diploma. Okay, today moving on to the next part of this triangle, which is the kind of the art and science of crafting herbal teas that work in multiple senses. In as much as that, if you have a herbal tea that is brilliantly evidentially effective clinically and therapeutically, but tastes revolting, people aren't going to drink it. If they don't drink it, it's not going to work. So, but if you have a tea that tastes really nice, but isn't therapeutically active, people are going to drink it, but it's not going to work. So when we're looking at these, we have to take into account therapeutic capacity and also palatability. And that's what the ancient traditions, so again, coming back to the Himalayan traditions, the Ayurvedic traditions, traditional European, particularly French, Spanish, traditional herbal medicine are a real hotbed in this context. TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, have these beautiful formulas for how we design and blend and craft herbal teas that tick all boxes. They taste nice, they're enjoyable to consume, they're clinically effective, and they're bioavailable. They're easy for the body to use and therefore benefit from. Um, and if you kind of um, combine that formula, if you look at the way European, Himalayan, Ayurvedic, traditional Chinese, if we look at the kind of formula they use, there's always slight variances, but generally speaking, we can combine them into what's called the five-fold formula. And it's slightly different to the formula we looked at the start of the week. Remember when we said if we're in on the first session on Monday, we said if we're crafting herbal prescriptions, we want herbs that target digestion, target detoxification, target body part, and target ailment and symptoms. That applies to all forms of herbal prescribing other than herbal teas. Because when we're using herbal teas, we need a slightly different blueprint and a slightly different formula. It's only subtly different. It's not, you'll see in a minute, it's very, very similar. The reason it's slightly different is because herbal teas are more energetically driven. If we're taking herbal tinctures, herbal powders, herbal capsules, herbal honey, we're ingesting whole herbs. Whereas in herbal teas, we're consuming a very delicate, water extracted, energetically different herbal modality. Herbal teas stand alone in many ways. So we need to construct herbal teas that are supported in a slightly different way. And you'll see a lot of similarities here. So this is again coming back to this is the Himalayan ways. They're all the same, really, but so they use characters. So you'll recognize the king herb. We spoke about the king herb previously. So when we're creating herbal teas, we're typically thinking, well, actually, no, there's a caveat here. This is to create herbal teas with therapeutic intent. Say you're trying to manage, an infection, or you're trying to manage insomnia or anxiety or high blood pressure or, poor circulation. Someone in your house, you're on the road, a friend, family, loved ones, you're paying patient. If you're trying to manage a clinical issue, you're trying to alleviate suffering and help someone, so you're actually creating a prescription with therapeutic intent, then this formula is a fail safe, in that you're trying to create a herbal prescription, a herbal tea blend that has a king herb, a night herb, possibly a balancing herb or a harmonizing herb, but not always, a digestive herb, and a messenger herb. This doesn't apply to general sipping teas. So, I've been drinking loads of nettle leaf tea, over the last week or so, and I just use nettles in a cup on its own. No complexity, no overthinking it, because that's just a general sipping tea. I don't need to reinvent the wheel. I don't need to overcomplicate it. You go into the garden, you pick a few, stalks of peppermint, you throw it in a cup, you pour over boiling water. You don't need to overcomplicate it. So for a general sipping tea that you drink just as a way of, boosting health, mobilizing benefits in a body that's otherwise pretty fit and well, you don't need to use this. You can just add one or two herbs. But if you're making prescription herbal tea blends that are specifically with therapeutic intent, this is the loose structure we should be thinking of. It doesn't mean we always have to have five herbs, because you could have two herbs that address all five of those areas. So don't think that every time you make a herbal tea for someone who's suffering, you have to use five herbs. But you do ideally want to be using, herbs that are tick four and sometimes five of those pathways. Does that make sense? Everyone happy with what I mean by that? In that We don't need to do this for general sipping teas. Um, okay, so the king herb is the obvious herb. The king herb is answers the question why. Why are you making the infusion in the first place? What are you trying to address? What health issue, what symptom, what ailment, what suffering are you trying to alleviate through making the herbal tea in the first place? Are you trying to help someone sleep? Are you trying to relieve constipation? Are you trying to do this, that, and the other? So the answer to that question is what will inform the king herb. It's ultimately what the person has told you. A neighbor knocks on the door, your mum phones you up because she's suffering with something. The king herb is the answer to that suffering. So it's the primary obvious herb. So, for example, if you're trying to, so the examples I put there, maybe you're trying to support immunity in someone who's getting cyclical infections or they're getting regular urinary infections. What do we need to do? We need to bolster immune defense. So the king herb would be a very powerful immune modulator, something like rhodiola, something like echinacea, something like andrographis. So that's the most important herb, the herb that jumps out at you. If you were trying to treat depression, it might be something like St. John's wort. If you were trying to treat arthritis, it might be something like turmeric. So it's the herb that answers the question, why am I using, why am I creating this prescription? So it's the most important herb in the tea. It's the herb that's going to have the biggest impact. It's going to herb the herb that's going to play the biggest role in alleviating the suffering that the person is experiencing. So the king herb is the obvious one. It's the easy one. It's the one that's easiest to work out. We then want to support that with the night herb. And this is, again, herbal alchemy. It's similar to what we discussed previously, but slightly different. In that the aim of knights in medieval culture was to do what? To do the bidding of the king, to support the king. So the night herb is a herb that fulfills the same objective as the king herb, but in a less aggressive way. So in a supporting way. Again, with the mindset, the concept of 1 + 1 doesn't equal 2. 1 + 1 equals 10. The king herb on its own, you get a gain. A king herb with a supporting night herb, you get an exponential gain. So when we're thinking about a night herb, we're thinking about a herb that has a really good impact upon what we're trying to target, but isn't quite so heavy handed. Because if you use two king herbs together, it can be too strong. It'll be too strong, probably in terms of taste. It will be very therapeutically, it runs the risk of being overkill. So the night herb is a way of maximizing, doubling, tripling the therapeutic effect, but in a sustainable way. So in the previous example, someone comes to you for help because they're experiencing, cyclical urinary infections or skin infections. And you think, okay, a king herb is jumps out at you, something like echinacea, something like rhodiola, like we said, or andrographis, really powerful immune modulators. Great options. So a night herb, you're thinking, okay, what other herbs that lend themselves well to use in a tea are also very good immune regulators, but not quite so strong. So their choices that would jump out with me at me would be herbs like rosemary or sage or thyme, even lavender. Very, clear evidence to show they support immunity, but not in that very heavy-handed, aggressive way that echinacea and rhodiola does. If you were managing something like arthritis that we spoke of yesterday, yes, turmeric could be a really good king herb because it's the most powerful anti-inflammatory. But a great night herb would be something like nettle, anti-inflammatory, very cooling, a very soothing, but not to the same level of extreme. So when you're looking for a night herb, you're trying to find herbs with a similar indication, but that comes slightly down the pecking order of impact. And that's why when we spoke about the triangle of success, we spoke about knowing how to formulate, blend and dose herbs. The fourth component was learning our herbs. And that's why, whether you're trying to be a village herbalist or a clinical herbalist, building up that herbal repertoire is really important because it allows us to build up that mental picture of what herbs are more king herbs, which herbs are more night herbs. Um, and that's why, again, in the online course, the master home herbalist and the online diploma, they all cover the primary 100 herbs. Generally speaking, in herbal medicine, village herbalist, clinical herbalist, most prescriptions will use one or more of the leading 100 herbs. And if over time, one of those a week, if you learn those in detail, you might be able to learn two, three a week. Very quickly, you can build up that encyclopedic knowledge of herbs. So, and that makes picking your night herb and your king herb much easier because they're in your head. And that, it takes time, but it's very quick. You learn herbal indications very quickly. Um, so king herb and night herb, they're in the same box. The herbs that address the issue of why am I helping this person? What am I trying to achieve? Is everyone happy with those two before we move on? Do they make sense? Everyone clear with what we're trying to achieve with those? Okay, good. Now we get into the subtler but really important variables in terms of the digestive and messenger herbs. The one exception here is the balancing herbs, in that they're not always needed. So a balancing herb is a herb that you would introduce into a tea if the other herbs were overly strong. So imagine you were using a herb I've spoken about a lot today because it's one of my favorite herbs is rhodiola. A Himalayan herb. It's one of the most powerful immune boosting, infection preventing herbs. But it's very, very heavy and it's very, very hot. And having something that extreme, ginger's another example. Ginger's obviously very pungent, very spicy, very hot. If you're using those kinds of extreme herbs, then typically you want a herb that's the opposite, just to reduce the severity of the action. Because if you have too many hot herbs, you run the risk of maybe inducing a little bit of reflux or a little bit of heartburn. So the balancing herb is a herb that reduces the intensity of the king herb and the night herb. Another example might be, say you were managing something like acid reflux or heartburn, and you were using very cooling herbs like licorice, like mint, like aloe vera, then they're too cold. So you might want to add a bit of a warming, heating herb to neutralize that overwhelming coldness. So it's important to talk about it because to not talk about it would be a misservice. But in reality, it's very rare we have to be that focused on balancing herbs because it's very rare to be using herbs collectively that are so overwhelmingly dominant in one way. You have to try and counteract that. So it's not something really you need to know about it, but it's not something that typically comes up that often. But it's just being the main culprit is ginger, actually, because ginger is so hot. If you're using lots of ginger tea in a therapeutic capacity, particularly if it's longer term, you definitely want something to go into that just to neutralize the intensity of that heat, particularly in the summer months when it's hot outside. Okay, so the balancing herb, we have to talk about it because if I didn't put it in, it would be, like I say, a misservice, but it's of secondary importance. But what is important is the second two classifications, the digestive herb and the messenger herb. We've already spoken about this. We spoke about the digestive herbs when we spoke on Monday, in that to benefit from herbs, putting herbal medicines into the body is not enough. Those herbs only become effective, they only become medicine when we're able to extract the healing compounds, deliver them through the blood, and allow them to enter into our cells. It's only then that herbal medicine becomes medicine. And the digestive herbs are herbs that are put into into teas to free up, to release and increase the absorption of the healing compounds found in the other herbs, particularly the king herb and the night herb. And if you look at any well-constructed tea blend, if you buy yogi teas or you buy pucker teas, you'll find they always typically, not always, but most of the time, they would include things like fennel seeds. They would include a little bit of dandelion. They would include some dried ginger. Why? Because they're the digestive herbs. They are the herbs that mobilize, free up all of the other goodness found in the other herbs. And you don't need much of these, just a pinch of fennel here, a sprig of mint there, a nettle leaf here. You don't need much, but and often they're usually herbs that taste nice. Chamomile, lemon balm, rosemary, thyme, sage, fennel seeds, ginger, mint. These are all palatable herbs, so they increase the palatability, sorry, of the blend, and that's really, really important in um, the clinical application of herbal teas, because like I said at the start, if a herbal tea is brilliantly effective but tastes revolting, people aren't going to drink it. If they don't drink it, they're not going to get the benefit of it. So increasing the digestive herbs are there to also increase the palatability of the blend. For me, it's usually something like lemon balm or mint, or fennel. Lemon balm is that beautiful citrusy flavor that often overwhelms the other taste. If you've got herbs that don't taste very nice, like rhodiola, which is okay, but it's quite an acquired taste. Lemon balm has the ability to overwhelm in a good way other tastes. So that's what comes out when you're drinking it. Ginger as well, fennel seeds, if you like that aniseedy taste. So the digestive herb is there to make the other herbs work more effectively and to make it more palatable. And then we come to the messenger herbs, and this is key. This is something that is more unique to the Eastern traditions. So Ayurvedic, Chinese, Himalayan medicine is the messenger herb. It's often called an anupana, which means a carrier. So it's a herb that carries the other herbal compounds into the area of the body that's affected. And again, this isn't new. Remember on Monday, we spoke about the other herbal formula, and we spoke about the importance of including herbs that target the body system. This is that, but also the ability to carry it. So this is called herbal affinities. Herbs that have a natural affinity for the body part you're trying to target. So if you're adding in a messenger herb, then that messenger herb is not only going to support and nourish and strengthen the body part affected, it's going to help carry all of the compounds from the king herb and the night herb into the area of the body you're trying to target. So really obvious or really famous examples here are the ones I put at the bottom, like Tulsi, one of the most revered herbs in Ayurveda, makes a beautiful tea, citrusy, minty, kind of beautiful, beautiful flavor. Has a natural affinity for the respiratory system. So if you add Tulsi to any tea blend, say you've got a sinus infection, or you've got a sticky cough, or you've got a cold or a flu, in the respiratory system, and you're trying to clear that infection, Tulsi is going to get all the goodness specifically into the respiratory tract, and so it works in a localized way rather than a global way. Things like hawthorn berry. I'll talk about hawthorn berry in a minute. One of the herbs that I drink a lot because it has such an affinity for the heart. We know hawthorn berry is a prophylaxis, a preventative for heart disease. We know that if you're having low levels of hawthorn long term, your risk of structural and functional heart disease and vascular disease is significantly reduced. We can look at herbs like rosemary, has a natural affinity for the muscle systems. We could look at herbs like Californian poppy or skullcap or passion flower for the nervous system. If you're suffering with, stress, anxiety, or nerve pain, back pain, sciatic pain, neuralgia, neuropathy, herbs like comfrey, or cayenne for pain, or whatever it may be. So most or all body systems will have herbs that have an affinity for them. And if you're adding that herb in, you're gonna greatly increase the ability of the other herbs to work because you're getting them to the site of the problem. And as an example of what that might look like relevant to where we are seasonally, hay fever. Hay fever is now, we've now entered hay fever season. All the grass seeds are pollinating. We've got the weeds, we've got, the trees will be blossoming soon. So, as a village herbalist or a home herbalist or a clinical herbalist, something you're probably going to see a lot of. You're probably going to come across people in your social circle who suffer with this. And if they say to you, listen, Joe blogs, Jane blogs, I know, you're into herbal medicine, you're into your herbs. Is there anything I could try to, to prevent and manage hay fever? Herbal teas are brilliant. Herbal teas are perhaps better than other modalities for this, because herbal teas are actually getting into the site of the problem. Your All the aromatics and the steam and the hot water is actually working in the respiratory tract. So teas are brilliant. So if someone collared me at the school gate and said, my husband's suffering really badly with hay fever, could you recommend something to help? What my brain and what all of our brains in time want to be doing, if we're fulfilling this role as a village herbalist, is to think, right, well, if I'm making a tea blend, what are the king herbs? What herbs jump out at me for managing something like hay fever? What is hay fever? It's an allergic reaction. What things suppress allergic reactions? Antihistamines. What are the conventional treatments for hay fever? Antihistamines. What herbs have the most clinical evidence to show they work as antihistamines? Yarrow and nettle. They are clinically proven, peer-reviewed antihistamines. So the first herbs I would be thinking of as well, as a king herb, a herb that's going to alleviate your suffering, nettle and yarrow. I would also be thinking something like chamomile. Chamomile is gentle, it's very soothing, it's very palatable, and it's a brilliant night herb because it also has proven antihistamine activity, but not to the same level as nettle and or yarrow. So the first few herbs I'd be thinking of: nettle, yarrow, chamomile. I wouldn't, in this context, like I said, most contexts, you don't need a balancing herb here because there's no real extremes. There's nothing in that blend that will make me think I need to balance that out. So I would just ignore that. As a digestive herb, one that would jump out to me would be something like ginger, or even something like, rosemary maybe, or sage. But ginger would be kind of the obvious choice because it has a natural affinity for digestion. Remember we spoke previously in the week that when it comes to optimizing digestion, there are fail-safe herbs that you can always use: fennel, ginger, cumin, rosemary, sage, things like that. So by adding ginger, you're going to get the digestive benefits, but it's also brilliant for preventing and clearing mucus buildup in the respiratory tract. So if you are suffering with hay fever, it's going to help the person to expel, clear out any respiratory symptoms. So you've got a double whammy there. You've got a herb that's brilliant as a digestive to free up all the other compounds, but also one that's going to further alleviate symptoms. And then as a messenger herb, you're doubling up here because ginger is a messenger herb. Ginger will help carry compounds into the respiratory tract. But you could go even further and say, well, Tulsi, like we just said, Tulsi, if you're thinking respiratory tract, you're thinking Tulsi. Tulsi is the number one herb for the lungs. So I would, straight away, you're thinking, right, you go onto something like a herbal apothecary like Baldwin's or Indigo Herbs or Napier's. These are all cheap herbs to buy. So go and buy 50 grams of dried nettle, dried yarrow, dried chamomile, and dried tulsi. That's going to last you ages, collectively. And then, you know, we'll talk about how to dose them in a minute, but get 1 tablespoon of each, fill up a jam jar of even ratios. So imagine you've got a big Kilner jar: 1 tablespoon of nettle, 1 tablespoon of yarrow, 1 tablespoon of chamomile, 1 tablespoon of tulsi, and keep on filling it up until the whole jar is full, and then give it a really good mix so it's all blended. And then it would just be 1 to 2 teaspoons of that collective blend into a cup. Add some fresh ginger, pour over boiling water, 2 or 3 cups a day. And that is an evidence-based, palatable, mechanistically effective tea blend that is almost guaranteed to reduce the severity and the prevalence of things like hay fever. And that's why herbal teas, and it's so common to use herbal teas alongside tinctures. They work, they're opposite sides of the same coin. And that's why, when I prescribe tinctures, I'll almost routinely prescribe teas as well, because one is, the tincture is heavier, very specific, working in the blood system, much more potent. The teas are a more energetically charged, more subtle, but in many ways just as powerful prescription. Combine them together and you get an exponential impact. um, so in terms of dosing, like I said, for a general sipping tea, not a therapeutic tea, not a tea that you're using to treat someone, you're looking for about 1 to 2 teaspoons of herb per cup. So if you're making just yourself a tea blend, typically that's a really good dose, 1 to 2 teaspoons of herb per cup, and then you pour over your boiling water. But if you're using therapeutic teas to actually target a clinical problem like hay fever or like arthritis or, like, fibroids or whatever it is, the flask method reigns supreme. And I cannot emphasize enough the impact that this has compared to not using it, because it's like, the best way of describing the flask method is, it's like comparing oral antibiotics with intravenous antibiotics. If you have a really bad infection and you go into a hospital, why will you always get IV, intravenous antibiotics, as opposed to oral antibiotics? Because with oral antibiotics, you get a big dose in the morning, so you get a big hit, then a big drop, and you have another dose and you get a big hit and a big drop, then another dose and a big hit and a big drop, and you go all through the night, 8, 9, 10 hours with no dose at all. So you're getting these big spikes. With intravenous antibiotics, you're getting a small drip, 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 24 hours a day, which means you get up to a therapeutic load quickly and you sustain it 24 hours a day. So you get a much bigger level of healing response with IV antibiotics. The flask method is kind of the herbal equivalent of IV. So if say you're drinking cups, say you had 1 cup of tea, a perfectly formulated bespoke tea blend, you have 1 cup in the morning, 1 cup in the afternoon, and 1 cup in the evening. That's brilliant. It's going to work. It's really good. But you're still getting big dose, big drop, big dose, big drop, big dose, big drop. Whereas if you had flasks, so say you had a flask filled with 3 or 4 cups of that same herbal tea, and you take it with you to work, or when you're going out, or when you're working at your desk, and you sip, 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 sip all day long, every hour, aiming to have a quarter of a cup. What that means is you're getting up the levels of the compounds in the tea, entering the blood, entering the affected body part, gets up to dose really quickly, and then stays up. Rather than having a big hit in the morning and then nothing for 4 hours, it gets up to dose quickly and then is sustained all through the day, because you're sipping, sipping, sipping. And the impact of that on the results you get are, they're beyond profound. I cannot tell you how much bigger a gain you will get through using the same blend as a flask method as opposed to a cup method. It's like chalk and cheese. I would say it's 50% more effective. And it's such a brilliant, and also it's less faff, because once you've made it in the morning, then you've got it with you. You haven't got to make any more teas. You haven't got to faff about with herbs. If you're at work, if you're at the school run, if you're going out for the day, take it with you. It's super easy to use. So it actually makes compliance easier. Um, and if you're using that for a chronic, there's a difference between a chronic dose and an acute dose. So for a chronic ailment like arthritis, or like back pain, or whatever it may be, chronic back pain, you typically want to fill that flask up with 3 or 4 cups worth. So somewhere between 2 and 4, probably 3 to 4 actually. So you have a flask with 3 cups of herbal tea in it. Take that with you. Sip, sip, sip all day. We will upload to the concierge page the instructions for making the flask method, okay, in terms of the volume. So we'll upload that in this afternoon. The one thing that's different is the acute doses. So if you're managing an acute problem, like an infection or like really bad stress or whatever, you want more. So you typically, you want, rather than having 3 cups over the course of the day used as a flask method, you typically want 5 cups, 4 to 5 cups. So you're sipping more regularly so that you're having a bigger response. Remember, we spoke about tinctures yesterday, and we said a chronic dose is 5 mils 2 to 3 times a day. An acute dose is 2.5 mils every 2 hours. This is the equivalent. So if you're managing an acute problem, again, your husband wakes up or your wife wakes up with a really bad sore throat, or your mum phones you up and says, I've got a really bad sinus infection, we should be thinking flask method, using a proper herbal blend, constructed in the right way, but using it in an acute dose, because that's going to ramp up the impact you have. But like I say, you'll get all the instructions for how to make the flask method uploaded, rather than having to talk about it now, because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But I just wanted to lastly finish on the power of sipping teas. I don't want to make this just about kind of therapeutic intent, because an ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. And in most of the world's longevity zones, particularly, so one of the reasons that the herbal health and vitality in middle age and beyond, that the 4-part course that comes with the other courses, the Master Home Herbalist and the diploma, the reason we did that course is because it uses the Himalayan traditions. And in the Himalayas per population has the highest percentage of centenarians. The longevity in the Himalayas is profound. And one of the things they attribute it to is they have almost obsession with tea. They use tea like we use water as a hydration. They sip teas all day long, not because they're ill, not to treat an ailment, but just as a preventative. It's their primary mechanism for keeping illness at bay. And I use sipping teas all through the day. And I just wanted to put some of the teas that I use the most as a blend, not as things like just nettle leaf tea, but as a blend. My all-time number one sipping tea that I use all year round, I love it, is the French tea of happiness, which is a blend that comes from the 17th century. It comes from the French Pyrenees. Around the Aquitaine region, from a long lineage of herbalists. And it was a sipping tea that the French system of village herbalists used as a way of making vitality, is probably a better option, boosting emotional well-being, emotional vitality, happiness, stress management, but also physiological vitality, happiness in the body. It's amazing taste. It's just it's like sunshine in a cup, and I love it. And we'll upload that remedy to the concierge page. And the other ones that I use, not so much now, in autumn and winter, I use the immune boosting tea a lot. It's probably the most effective herbal blend that I've come across for immunity. I also use the healthy heart tea a lot, because I have a familial risk factor for things like arrhythmias, palpitation. So that's a blend that includes lots of heart health herbs, like linden, like hawthorn, etc., etc. So I just have killed it. So in our kitchen we have like a whole cupboard filled for home herbalism. Drying herbs, forage herbs. We've got loads of Kilner jars, and they're just labeled. So I just pick up the jar, and I might want to have the healthy heart tea, and just goes into the cup or into the flask, and it's there. Or the French tea of happiness. So again, those of you who have bought the Master Home Herbalist, you'll find dozens and dozens and dozens of tea blends in there. Okay. That talk about all of this. So this is something that I would, getting au fait and getting confident with blend. And also blending herbal teas is fun. It's a creative act. It's almost like art, because you can customize, you get to, you know, hold the herbs, smell the herbs, feel the herbs. You get to build a relationship with them. And you know, it's beautiful to know someone at work or at school, whoever, who's got a problem, and you got the herbs, you blend them, you put them into a nice pouch, you label it, you put the dosing instructions, you give it to that person, and knowing it's going to help them. It's a really inspiring, it's quite an emotive thing to do. I love blending herbs and making herbal tea blends. Great gifts as well, great birthday gifts and Christmas gifts for, you know, health conscious people in your life. So getting, yeah, I would, once you're confident with tinctures, I would prioritize getting au fait with using, blending, creating, crafting herbal infusions, because they're um, a staple in your armory as a herbalist, particularly a home herbalist, because you'll be using them again and again and again. So if you got, so I'm thinking now about what this draws this week to a close. We've got 2 bonus sessions next week before we close everything down next Thursday. So a week today, this closes down, the Facebook group closes down, everything closes down, and the 40% discount closes as well. But we've got 2 bonus sessions, and what I was thinking of running them on was one, um, herbal painkillers, because over-the-counter painkillers are the most commonly used drug in the world, particularly in the domestic setting. And I wanted to talk about an evidence-based, clinically proven, forageable but also buyable herb for replacing over-the-counter painkillers. And I was also thinking about doing one on the Himalayan longevity herbs and the goji berry remedies and the mechanisms around that. Um, but let me know your thoughts on that. Does that sound like a good use of time for the bonus sessions? I'd like to know what you guys think about that. Um, okay. Yeah, Baldwins are a brilliant. So to those of you looking to buy dried herbs, Baldwins are very good. Star Child, Napier's, Indigo Herbs, Detox Trading. Actually, Detox Trading are brilliant because they're actually much cheaper than Baldwins. Okay, so do check out Detox Trading. Um, right, I'll let everyone go because I know that I'm getting close to my 45-minute cutoff. I don't want to keep people too long. So, massive thank you for all of your engagement and energy. Like I say, it's not over yet. We've got bonus sessions to come. Those of you who are looking to continue the journey, I know loads of you have. It's been an absolute privilege to welcome you into the Master Home Herbalist and or the clinical diploma. The Ayurveda, sorry, the online diploma in herbal medicine. Any questions, let me know. Have a lovely day, and I will see you soon. Cheers, guys.